Welcome to the recorded version of What Seniors Need During the Holidays, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Our presenter today is Dr. Amy Dupree. Dr. Dupree, a gerontological social worker, is an internationally renowned expert on lifestyle issues relating to caregiving, retirement, aging, and family dynamics. Dr. Dupree is president of Essential Conversations, Inc. and Dr. Amy, Inc., a company dedicated to family caregiver wellness. Dr. Dupree holds a PhD and master's in social work, specializing in gerontology, and earned her CSA, a designation for which she also trains others as part of their accreditation. Dr. Dupree is a much sought-after speaker at corporate and professional events on the topics of caregiving, aging, and retirement, and she's also a frequent guest on radio and television. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Amy Dupree. Thanks for joining us today, Amy.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And welcome to all of you. As you know, we're well into the holiday season at this point, the good, the bad, the hectic, and probably most of us are just trying to stay on top of things, and that's true for our clients and their caregivers as well. So what we want to do today is talk about what older adults need and want for the holidays, what they tell us they need and want, of course, and how we as professionals can help, because what we can do is clearly help the older adults directly, and we can also pass on tips to their family caregivers. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today are really things that can be passed on either to the caregiver or to the older adult. Also, I'm aware that a lot of us who are on this call are adult children who are caring for aging parents or may have other loved ones in our lives that we're caring for. So I hope there's something in today's seminar for those of you who are caregivers that will help you have an easier and more enjoyable holiday season. What we're going to talk about today are specifically, as you see on the screen, the types of gifts that older adults want most, how we can help to keep the holidays merry, joyful, without it becoming too much and overwhelming, which it often does, not just for the older adults, but for their caregivers. And then how to help seniors who've lost one or more of their senses, such as hearing or vision, to better enjoy the holiday through using other senses. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about some specific tips for caregivers and what we can do to help caregivers enjoy the holidays more and to feel less stressed, and then some resources for everybody. So with that as our starting point, let's take a look at a little snapshot of what we could call a happiness quotient, if you will. Now, if you're like me, you may not be familiar with the Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index. And this Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index is really the first, and it's also the largest survey of its kind. It's only been around since 2008, so it's still pretty new. And it's based on 1,000 calls a day, 7 days a week. It's designed to be kind of the Dow Jones of health, if you will, giving a daily measure of people's well-being at the close of every day. So when it was originally conceptualized, it was designed for policymakers as well as other people, but with the idea that policymakers could take a look at this. And it's based on the World Health Organization definition of health, which, in case you're not familiar with, is not only the absence of infirmity and disease, but also a state of physical, mental, and social well-being. So, again, we're not talking just about not having the bad things in our life, but this is really about feeling a sense of happiness, of physical, mental, and social well-being. So if you look at this, overall Americans were slightly less likely to experience happiness during 2012 compared with 2011. But if you look at the trend line, it's going in the way we'd hope, which is in the positive direction. So take a look at that for a minute, and I'm going to review with you just so you get a sense of where this is. So if you compare to 2008, in 2012, Americans had significantly fewer days when less than 40% reported experiencing a lot of happiness and enjoyment without a lot of stress. Okay? In 2012, there were 3 such days. So you can see the 14 versus the 3. So this is a good thing. You want this to go in that direction. So in 2018, 14, 2012, 3. So that's a great trend line. But here's where it gets really interesting, is to understand what all that means. So when you take a look at what the Gallup Healthways survey finds, it finds that Americans are more likely to experience happiness and enjoyment on holidays and less likely, this probably won't surprise you, to experience happiness following negative news events. And Steve, you can click to that next slide if you want. We'll take a look at that. So you'll see the holidays there, the days when people said that they experienced the most happiness without a lot of stress and worry. Now, I think this is interesting because, as you know, we commonly view the holidays as a pretty stressful time. People love it, but they also talk about the stress part of it. And I thought I'd share this snapshot of the happiest days of the year. So I'm not sure what to make of the fact, by the way, that on the happiest day of the year, only 66% of Americans report experiencing a lot of happiness, enjoyment without a lot of stress and worry. You know, probably most of us would like to see that more at about 96% than 66%. But I think it's interesting that it's Christmas Day, given what we often hear about the holidays and the stress. And then you see the second happiest day of the year was Thanksgiving. So that was right behind it, New Year's Day. So boom, 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 we've got the holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and New Year's. And then you can see followed by Mother's Day. And I like that the fact daylight savings time starting actually made this list as well. And I probably all of us can appreciate that right now, especially at this time of year. But here's why I think this is so important. As you can see by this, you have to say, so what is it that makes people so happy on these days? Well, what Gallup found was that people are happiest when they spend 6 to 7 hours socializing each day. And, of course, when you would think that would happen would be on weekends and on holidays, much more than during the normal work week. So when you think about that thing about socializing being one of the key factors, we're going to come back to that in a minute. You can see, and even on the happiest days, we still have a third of the population not so happy and feeling more stressed. So in a press release that announced the results of this survey, Daniel Kahneman said, in general, we find that misfortunes tend to reinforce each other. In addition to physical pain, illness also increases feelings of stress, sadness, and worries about money, and it lowers energy. These consequences of illness are buffered or mitigated to some extent by the availability of health insurance, by higher income, by being married, and by social contact with others. So Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist, and he's a winner of the 2002 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science. So when you think about that, what he says about the misfortunes reinforcing each other and about, you know, people, in addition to feeling the physical pain, what happens in that is the feeling of stress and sadness and worries. I think this has a lot of relevance for older adults because people tend to suffer from more chronic conditions as we age. And the fact that you take that fact and then you take the addition that we're happier when we socialize for 6 to 7 hours, it has implications for older adults who may be isolated and less mobile. So as we go through this, I just want us to remember that because, again, if you look at what's bringing people happiness and what's increasing their stress, are things that either we can impact or we can encourage family members and friends to impact. So we've just determined that the holidays are, generally speaking, a happy time. But they also obviously bring up challenges and specific challenges for people. And I'm sure, you know, if you think in your own life, if you've lost someone, this time of year can be hard because we have lots of memories about time spent with that person. And certainly as people become older and they're having more losses of people that they love, this can become a bigger issue. If they're ill or have pain or have reduced mobility, or they may have a lot of family stress, those are very difficult things at this time of year. And certainly we have a lot of folks in our country who are still under a lot of financial pressure, and that can really impact. Now, that's all the backdrop as we talk about that. What we want to do now is turn our attention to some specific tips that can potentially help increase the number of people we see who are feeling that happiness that we talked about earlier without having the added stress. And so we're going to talk about time, tasks, and celebration. And we're going to talk about those as gifts instead of thinking of just the tangible gifts. Because often when we talk about gifts, that's what we focus on. We focus on tangible. We think about things like clothing and jewelry and electronics. And obviously those can be wonderful presents. But when we talk about the valuable gifts of time, task, celebration for many people we know, those really become much more precious as they get older. And so we have to be creative in helping families figure out how to give those gifts in the midst of their busy schedule, and also to recognize the importance of those gifts. So let's start by talking about the gift of time. Sometimes when an older person wants more than anything is companionship, and they want connection with other people. You know, if you think about it, that's true of all of us, but for many of us, we have other ways of having that gift of that connection. And we may not be as reliant on other people to provide that, because we can actually go and seek it out. And Steve, if you can click to the next slide, that'd be great. And so what we have to do, I think, is encourage family members to recognize the importance of this gift of companionship. And for family, it may be thinking about the holidays differently, and instead of it being, we're going to get together on this one day and have this big event, that maybe it's them doing brief visits, popping by, making sure there's more continuity in the contact. Might be, as it says on your screen, making a lunch or a dinner date with an older adult, and making sure that they're, again, this is a season that often brings up for many people the losses that they've had in their life. So I think if we can help family think about the fact that they can just be more present in small ways, that can make a difference. Obviously, doing fun things together is something we can encourage families to do. You know, that many communities today have light displays, and an older adult who has mobility issues may still be able to get in the car and go drive around and view those, and could really enjoy that. The other thing that I think we have to help family recognize is that if they themselves are short on time, that they can enlist other people to help, that they could ask family, perhaps members that are not as engaged in care typically, to get involved, friends or neighbors, even in having a professional caregiver, hiring someone who will share meals with an older adult and make friendly visits, can really help make this season much, much easier. And I think, again, family doesn't always think about the fact that it's great to have the one big celebration, but there's a lot of time between Thanksgiving and New Year's that can drag on for many older adults if they're just simply sitting and thinking about the past because they're unable to get out. And of course, I'm speaking now of people who are requiring care and are at home and need that kind of help. I'm not talking about the vital older adults who are able to still be fully engaged in life. I think the point here is to help older adults and families focus more on the gift of time. We know we all benefit and enjoy spending time with people we love, but when you hear the Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index and what we just talked about a few minutes ago, it really highlights how important it is to spend time together in order for people to experience higher levels of happiness. Okay, so let's take a look now at another gift, which is the gift of task support. There are a lot of things that people can do, family members can do, and I also think there are a lot of people in the community at this time of year who are willing to volunteer and to help out older adults, even at a greater rate than there are at other times of the year. So, you know, thinking about even going to senior centers or encouraging family to see if there are volunteer programs going on at senior centers where younger, healthier seniors are helping older seniors out. That may be a consideration if an older adult or their family belong to a faith community, exploring what's available from volunteers from that faith community. They're, again, thinking outside the family. And then if people have the resources to hire a professional caregiver, that's great. Thinking about some of the tasks, you know, many older adults still want to give gifts and want to be part of that, but it can be tough to get out to the malls and the stores. And so having somebody help out with that and perhaps do a shopping excursion can be a great gift to an older adult. The other thing that many people now we know are online, we have more seniors online than ever before, but even for those who are online, they may not have done a lot of online shopping. So if family members or one family member could just spend part of a day helping an older adult shop online, that can be a big gift to give. And again, even if they are computer savvy, they just may not have shopped online. And it's not always intuitive working, as you know, through shopping carts and figuring all of that out. So it's a fabulous gift. And, of course, wrapping and sending the packages can become a big ordeal, especially the mailing. But I know of a couple of families where they actually turn the gift wrapping into kind of a mini event, as it says. You know, they end up putting music on and having hot chocolate and cookies, and the whole family gets together and they wrap the presents and then send them out. If an older adult doesn't have the strength or the balance to actually deal with carting presents to the post office or to UPS or wherever, obviously having family and friends help with that, or helping to hang the ornaments or get out the tree or put decorations, both get them out and put them away. I recently lost a dear friend of mine who was 85 this year. She was very healthy up until the last couple of years. But in the last couple of years, she really had a lot of balance issues and a lot of mobility and strength issues. And this was one of the tasks her daughter took on, was to come down, get out all the ornaments, put up the tree, then at the end of the season, put them away. And she said, you know, I wanted my mom to continue to be able to experience Christmas in the way that she had, and I knew this was one of the best gifts I could give her. And I think that's again, a way that we can help family members think about it differently. Another idea is to help someone write the greeting cards. For many older adults, this is a tradition that still has a great deal of meaning, and they don't want to give that up. And I think often, though, they may not have the ability, either vision-wise or coordination-wise, to continue to write the Christmas cards. I actually knew of a woman who was nearing 100 in my father's building when he was still alive, and she had loved doing Christmas cards, but she wasn't able to write them anymore because she had a tremor. And I heard from the building manager that this woman called when in April, 8 months before Christmas, asking if there might be somebody at the holidays who could come help her write Christmas cards, because she just had somebody help her write the thank you notes for her birthday. And she said she wanted to get this arranged ahead of time. And the building manager and I chuckled and decided that was the definition of optimism as you're nearing 100, to be booking your Christmas card writing 8 months away. So, you know, I think if we can recognize and help families recognize that this tradition is still very important to a lot of older adults, even though many people have stopped sending cards, that could be something somebody could spend, you know, it could be a grandchild who spends an afternoon doing that. Okay, let's take a look talking about celebration and what matters in this. So this is an alternative gift idea, right, is to think about what matters during this season for the older adult. And for many people, it's a combination of faith, family, and caring for others. So, you know, it may mean, in this case, supporting an older adult in their volunteer activities, such as gathering supplies for the homeless shelter or taking part in serving a holiday meal. I know my mom, every year when she was alive, before she had her stroke, would help serve Christmas dinner, and that was very important to her to do this holiday meal. And after a while, you know, it became a family event that we did that. So is there something that the older adult really values or has valued over the years that we can suggest to families? Take a look at that. That could be your gift. And thinking about whether or not they attend on a regular basis a church or other faith community. Perhaps they want to go to whatever the religious ceremony is for the holiday. And, you know, we're not just talking about Christmas here, right? We're talking about Christmas specifically, but we just had Hanukkah. You know, there are many other faiths and their traditions. So everything we're talking about can be discussed from any of the faith's tradition. So thinking about if there is a religious ceremony, perhaps the family member taking the older adult, going, if there are alternate times, going to an earlier service, if it's a quieter time, you know, but having the idea of family sharing in that. And regardless of whether the gift is of time, task, or celebration, I think the idea here is to tune into potential limitations that an older adult may have, so that all of this doesn't become overwhelming and that the fun kind of gets taken out of it. So let's talk about how do you be merry without overdoing it. This is really about thinking about people's changing needs and abilities. So this has to be looked at every year in a different way. And I think what often happens is either the older adult or other members in the family really get stressed or exhausted during the holidays because they're trying to do everything. And the truth is that we have to alter things to adjust to how people change. And dementia, of course, is one way to think about this. And it doesn't have to be that someone has dementia. It could be changes just based on strength, or another illness like Parkinson's disease could be an issue. But let's talk about it from the standpoint of someone with dementia. And I last year wrote about this. I got asked to do a Huffington Post blog on this topic. And as part of that, a colleague told me a story that I wrote about, and I thought it was a great illustration of what often happens in families in really well-meaning ways. So this colleague who told me the story had an aunt who had been a doctor and a very active, engaged woman, and she had developed Alzheimer's disease. So what they did at Thanksgiving in her family was they wanted to keep the family tradition. So they picked her up in the morning and brought her over to join the celebration, and there she was. She spent all day with people who loved her, who wanted to make her feel comfortable, who wanted to make her feel cared for. And what happened instead was her aunt struggled throughout the day, and she said, you know, we realized in retrospect all the things that were difficult for her. So that she normally ate at noon, and instead the family Thanksgiving dinner was at 2. And this threw her off because she had become very routinized about how her day went. She didn't know whose house she was in. She was in a close relative's house that she'd been in many, many, many times, but of course the dementia had progressed enough that this no longer felt like a familiar place, and it didn't feel safe. And then her aunt had gotten to a point she didn't recognize the familiar faces. And then added to that, there were a lot of people at the house, and so there was a lot of commotion and a lot of talking and people having a wonderful time. But for the aunt, it was too much, and she became very stressed out and started to get upset as the day progressed and became a little difficult behaviorally. She started to have, started to act out a little bit because she was exhausted and stressed and anxious. So the question about then we have to ask is, how do we help families prevent these kind of situations? Because that certainly doesn't have to happen. So one of the ideas, as you'll see on the next slide, is to simplify and compromise, which is really what we're talking about. So in the case of this conversation with my colleague, she said as she looked back, she would have done things so much differently. She said, first of all, what we wouldn't have done was to bring her over to the house where the celebration was. Instead, we would have taken turns going over, one or two of us together, to visit for short periods of time during the day. She said the second thing we would have done is we would have brought dinner to her, and we probably would have served it to her the next day because it wouldn't have mattered to her, and she ate at noon, and she didn't want to eat at 2 o'clock. And this had lost meaning for the aunt. Her dementia had progressed enough. So she said we would have had her enjoy the meal, but it probably would have been the next day. And she said we wouldn't have had the expectation that we continue the tradition in the exact same way it did. She said she had changed, but we hadn't changed to accommodate that. So we're going to talk about 5 ways in the next section that we can make this season less stressful and more joyful for older adults. And this is just the first way, to simplify and to compromise. So let me give you a couple other ways, and you see them on your screen, that people can simplify and compromise. If there's, for example, the older woman who used to do all the cooking may not be able to do that. So perhaps the meal can be a family affair where everybody helps out by bringing a dish. This year I was for Thanksgiving, I was at my second family's house, and the mom in that house has had breast cancer this year and is undergoing chemotherapy. And she'd had a chemo treatment 2 days before Thanksgiving. And so we moved where we have Thanksgiving and had it actually at their house with all of us bringing things and managing the dinner so that she didn't have to. But if she didn't feel well, she could go upstairs into her own bed and relax and get away from the crowd and the family and take a break. She only did that once in the whole day. But I think the fact it was at her house and with her things and her familiarity made it better for her, and it was a little less stressful. If she didn't feel well, she was in familiar surroundings. And again, she's cognitively fine and has managed these dinners for years and years and years, but this ended up being a better solution for this year. The other thing, if you think about bedtimes, if bedtimes have changed and an older adult gets tired early, and I used to see this with my dad in his last few years, he really had enough of being in a crowd of people at a pretty short period of time. He would like it for a couple of hours, then he was done. And again, he was cognitively intact, but it was just too much for him. He had gotten to a point where he liked it quieter, and he enjoyed the family, but he wanted to be able to get away. So changing the time of the meal may be a good idea. It could be changed just, from 6 o'clock to 4 o'clock, but it could also be turned from dinner into a brunch. The other thing I think about simplifying and compromising is thinking about the number of decorations. One of the great things I think now, and this is thinking about a Christmas celebration, many people who've had big Christmas trees for years, there are now great options on smaller, more manageable trees that don't require people to have to put the same amount of work in, or if they're still using live trees, don't require the same amount of mess. For thinking about that holiday, there's a way to simplify it by thinking, I talked with a colleague the other day, and she told me about a situation where a family had decided they wanted their ornaments out, but they didn't want to go through the hassle of the tree, and they were an older couple. And they found these very creative ways to display the ornaments, hanging them without using the tree. And they laughed that they were putting together a two-dimensional tree instead of a three-dimensional tree. But they said they realized that it, for them, was no longer about having the tree, but making sure there were lights in some way and the ornaments. So again, that's a Christmas tradition, but thinking about that same sort of how do you compromise and change things for whatever the holiday is. The other thing I think is thinking about how we can be an older adult's hands and feet. And we talked about shopping, wrapping, mailing, and participating with somebody. But this is about not just participating, but actually taking that task over. And perhaps that's a way that we can simplify for the older adult and for the whole family. Okay, let's talk now about how we help people connect. So despite those numbers that we saw earlier, we know that for a lot of folks, and especially for older adults who may not be able to get out as easily, loneliness, isolation, depression are not uncommon during the holidays. So the second way that we can help keep the holidays happy is to help older adults connect with others. So thinking about this again practically, if somebody can't drive, we can offer to take them to go visit friends or to take them out to lunch with their friends. I think this becomes an issue for when a set of older adults can no longer drive. It often is tough to get to see each other, and this is a great gift that family can give. The other thing that we can help people do is to connect via technology, and I'm sure many of you or most of you are familiar with Skype, which is a wonderful way to connect people if they're on the computer, and it's free, so it's a great way to connect Skype to Skype. I actually have friends whose mom is age 76, and she lives abroad, and my friends just had twins, and almost every day they do a video conference using Skype when they cook dinner. So what they've done is put the computer on a raised part of the kitchen counter, and that way, Grandma can see the twins, and everybody can see her, and they chat while getting dinner ready. It really is an amazing thing how we can have people feel like they're in the same room now with this kind of communication. I know a lot of grandparents are using Skype as a way to stay in contact with grandchildren who don't live nearby. I think also talking about social media is important here. There was a study done by Pew Research, and this is in April of 2012, so it's pretty current. 53% of American adults age 65 and older use the Internet or email. And according to Pew, although these adults are still less likely than the other age groups to use the Internet, the latest data represents the first time that half of older adults are going online. So we now have over half of older adults online. Now, I'm sure that doesn't surprise you because when you think about it, we've got boomers aging into the senior years right now. I think, that number is just going to go up and up and up. But I think there's still a stereotype we have that older adults aren't using computers or they're not online that much, and they are. And what's interesting, there were several years of very little growth among that group, and then the gains jumped again. So it's significant now about how much it's gone up. Here's another interesting part of it. As of February 2012, 1/3, 34% of Internet users who are over the age of 65 use social networking sites such as Facebook, and 18% do it on a typical day. So that's pretty high to say that 34% are using Facebook and 18% are doing it on a regular day. I think if you think about why that is, many older adults are using Facebook to connect with grandchildren again, as well as their friends. Reuters ran a story last year that I thought was really interesting about 87 libraries in New York City that are running these really popular 90-minute classes called Facebook for Seniors. And it's for seniors to get online and learn how to use Facebook in a way that works for them. There was a woman in the story, she was 76, who was completely new to Facebook. And she hoped the class would provide another way to stay in touch with her family and friends. She's quoted as saying, "I understand that young people, the grandchildren, don't use email very much now. They only use Facebook specifically. So I feel it's another way to communicate with them." And I think we have a lot more grandparents and older adults in general recognizing that in order to stay in touch with the younger family members, they're going to have to do this. The class instructor, by the way, said that he really found that the seniors were much more tech savvy than they gave themselves credit for, and what they really just needed was practical instruction and some confidence boosting. So these are trends we're going to see, and I think, again, we can encourage people to stay connected in these ways. Okay, now let's talk about how to help them share memories and create new memories. This is the third way of helping to keep the holidays upbeat and happy. So thinking about holiday memories that are pleasant, a lot of people like to reminisce about holidays and this time of the year and their childhood memories or memories when they were raising their kids. So I think especially if you think about this with older adults who are suffering with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, they may still have those long-term memories, and it's a great way to give them an opportunity to think and talk about them. The other thing we can do is help them create new memories by simply having a video that highlights some of the special moments of the season that family members are sharing, having them connect either online or watching televised holiday worship services if they can't get out, having a group come sing Christmas carols. I mean, these are all things that certainly we could encourage families to do for an older adult who's struggling to get through the holidays in a way that's upbeat and positive. And, of course, when we talk about listening to carols, again, assuming that someone is celebrating Christmas carols for many people are connected with very happy memories. And if someone has dementia, we know now that there's great benefit to listening to music that makes them feel good, that hopefully connects them with good memories. And there are many nursing homes now using iPods that family members have programmed with music that matters to their older family member. So I think encouraging families to think about that for the holiday season can be a great gift to the older adult. Okay, the fourth thing that we can encourage families to do is to manage expectations and activities. And this is really a key one, because sometimes you doing all of the usual traditions just is too much, especially if an older adult's health is compromised. So if you think about the clients that you have and you think about their family members, the family members who are not spending regular time with the older adult may not be as aware of their limitations and may not be as sensitive to making shifts in the traditions to accommodate those changes. So it may be up to us as professionals to just do a gentle reminder that things are changing and to have a conversation with the family about what they could choose to do without doing everything. I always say it's better to choose one or two traditions instead of trying to do all of the traditions. It's really better to enjoy a couple of things than be stressed out by many things. And let's face it, all of the activities, the sounds, the sweet foods, the visitors can be overwhelming for a lot of people. So this is about getting families to set realistic activities and expectations. And I think one of the things that sometimes gets in the way of this is people get this sense that time's running out. And so if we're going to have this tradition, we better have it this year because we don't know what next year holds. And I think that's where we can be a voice of a little bit of a voice of reason to step in and say, you know, I know things are changing. What's the one or two things that you think would have the most meaning for your mom? Because if you do just those and focus on those, it's likely you'll all enjoy the holidays more. Okay, and now the last one of the 5, to ask for and to get help. And I think this is really a key one that we can encourage families to do and that they're probably least likely to do without some encouragement. So thinking about caregivers, having someone clean their house for them. If they're an older adult they're caring for lives in their own home, maybe having somebody come in and clean their house too. Encouraging them to consider to hire, as you see there, a professional caregiver who could lend an extra hand, lighten everyone's load, even if it's just for the holidays. This person may just come in for a few weeks, but if it's a very busy time, that could really make life much easier for everyone. You know, as we know, caregiving is extremely challenging. I get letters and comments on caregiverstress.com that people write, and I can tell you caregivers are really struggling with figuring out how to balance this role with the rest of their life, and especially at this season. If we can do things to encourage them to lighten their load, we'll be doing a really good service for these folks. Women in particular tend to be very hard on themselves and often feel that they aren't doing enough. So if we can simply, as professionals, reinforce the fact that they don't have to do everything, it's not realistic to do everything, and it's not only acceptable, it's a good idea to get some help, we can really be a great support to the family caregivers. Okay, we're going to switch gears for just a couple minutes and talk about ways that family members can help make the holidays more enjoyable for older adults who've lost one of their senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching. And they may not have lost it entirely. It may just weaken, so they may have partial vision or partial hearing. And I love what Diane Hendricks said. She's a social worker from the Homestead Center for Successful Aging. She says there are ways that you can help the older adults still enjoy the season by encouraging them to rely on the senses they still have. And that's what we're going to look at here. So how do you do that? And let's start by taking a look at vision loss. So when we consider the vision loss, obviously if an older adult suffers from vision loss, there are some things that won't be as fun in the holidays, such as the lights and those sort of things. But music is such a part of holidays that could be the antidote to missing out on the sights for people. So again, thinking about playing holiday songs or listening to televised holiday music or programming, and thinking about older adults who may have dementia, who are very frail, getting them to sing along or to tap in rhythm or to sway in rhythm may be a great way to keep them engaged while listening to the music. Another idea, again, for older adults who've lost vision is to think about conversation and really making conversation the focus. So thinking about memories by using open-ended questions. So, for example, you know, what's your favorite holiday memory when you were young? Something just as basic as that could get the conversation going. Or what was a holiday story that your family used to tell? Anything that gets people re-engaged and feeling a part of the celebration. And again, then the vision loss becomes less of an issue. If you think about people with hearing loss, obviously another of the senses, a lot of the holidays, again, do have music attached or programming on TV or something, but older adults can still experience the holidays through their other senses. Now, recognizing that someone may have both a combination of reduced hearing and reduced seeing or reduce of something, but assuming that they can either smell something or taste something or touch something. So, you know, you see a couple things on the screen there, being able to look at the lights, gingersnaps, which have a wonderful scent that fill the house, maybe baking something together, whatever it may be that evokes some of those great feelings of the holidays without having to rely on the hearing in this case. Okay, let's take a look at the third one, which is loss of sense of smell. And this happens as older adults age. And this is a sense we don't talk about losing as much, but it certainly does happen for all of us as we get older, that our sense of smell changes as well. So again, now focusing instead of on the smells of the holiday, the sights and the sounds of the holiday. And I think anything that can shift it into that and away from anything that requires tasting or smelling, because these two go so closely together, it can be hard if somebody's lost their sense of smell. They may not enjoy some of the other parts of the holiday, dinner celebration or the baking that's gone on. One of the activities that some people really enjoy engaging in are craft activities having to do with making holiday cards into ornaments and writing on the back who sent the card and the year on the back of the ornament so that it becomes a keepsake. That can be a great way for a family member to spend time with someone, again, who may have limited capabilities in various ways but can still enjoy the season. And then finally, thinking about losing the sense of touch or taste. If somebody's lost their sense of touch, you might really focus in on now the sense of the holiday or on the lights or on the other things. And if somebody's lost their sense of taste, one of the things you can do is relive some of the memories of their favorite dishes by creating a recipe book to share with younger family members and friends. This is, I think, a great idea for people who the meal or the baking was such a big part of their holiday tradition, and they don't feel they can do it anymore, is to share it with other people. So they can copy and mount favorite holiday recipes, and then something that can be passed down for generation. Okay, so now let's switch gears just before we finish up and talk about the caregivers, because I think we can't close this out without thinking about the impact the holidays have on caregivers. As you know, it's a very stressful time for many people who are trying to work, take care of a family member, have their own families, and try to create this great holiday experience for their aging relative, while still taking care of potentially their kids having a great holiday experience. So I think one of the best things you see there is in the top of the list, flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. That I think if we can get people thinking about this ahead of time, it's great, but we're well into the season now. But making a list of what's the most important things, I think one of the greatest things I heard somebody suggest one time is they had to ask an older adult and their separately, the family, to list out what meant the most to them about the holidays. And this was a family that had a lot of traditions. And as it ended up, when they actually sat and did the list, what really meant the most to them was just having time together, and everybody had one or two things that they loved from the traditions. And so once they listed it out, they started taking their holiday celebration and making it a lot more simple and much more enjoyable, because they were trying to do too much, and everybody said that the year before had been a bit of a disaster because one of the parents had needed caregiving, and it had shifted how they could do the holiday celebration, but nobody had shifted their expectations. So building in this flexibility can make a big difference. And again, thinking about the traditions, what could be let go of, what could be just perhaps let go of for 1 year. I think that's the other thing we can remind families, that if they alter a tradition for this year, they don't have to necessarily alter it forever. And a lot of traditions don't have to be let go of, but they can be adapted. They can be made more simple. I think we have to really help caregivers communicate what they need and what would reduce their stress. And this is a difficult thing for people to do at any time of the year, but especially when they feel there are a lot of expectations on them during the holidays. It may be hard for people to do that. And obviously, difficult family dynamics can really take center stage, if you will, during holidays. People can engage in all of the difficulties in their family in a very different way when they're having to spend time together and when there are all these expectations. And communication is really the best way to smooth that out and to avoid problems. Another thing is to have people make time to enjoy their own tradition. So it's not just about fulfilling the traditions of somebody else, but is there something that's important to them? And then good self-care is still really important for people to engage in, even when they're caregiving and it's the holidays. So making sure they schedule exercise, that they have healthy snacks on hand, that they figure out ways not to be exhausted the whole time because they're never getting enough sleep for 6 weeks. All of the things that are just normal good self-care really need to have more focus during the holidays because it's so easy to let them go. And then encouraging people to ask for and receive help. I think, again, as professionals, we really need to encourage caregivers to do this because they struggle so much with making sure that they think they're supposed to do everything. And as I say to people, the goal is not that you do everything, it's that you make sure your loved one gets the best care possible, and often that requires a team. It's not about doing it alone. So in that vein, let's take a look at the resources that we could pass on to our clients and their caregivers. Caregiverstress.com has wonderful resources on it, and you can get on there and look at holiday situations. You can look at stress reduction, whatever you might want to do to pass on to clients. And, these are things that you can print out and hand to clients or send them to the website. And similarly, homeinstead.com. And the Huffington Post article I mentioned to you, this is in case you want to take a look at a couple of the things in there. That's the way you can download that. Mayo Clinic has wonderful resources. If you haven't been on this site before, it's worth your time to get on it. They have things for caregivers. They have things on stress. They have things about the holidays. And they typically are one-pagers that are practical. They are ideas that you can share with clients. Again, you can print them or send the client to the site. And they're things that really can make a difference, and their simplicity does not mean that they're not useful. It's just easy to pass on. And then Real Simple had some great ideas around Christmas decorations and things to do, and so we're passing that on to you as well in case that interests you. Okay, before we turn it over to Steve and open in the lineup for questions, let's just talk about where you go from here. So I think it's thinking about specific strategies that you might want to share with older adults and their caregivers, and thinking about, what are the things that you think might help a family have a better holiday this year, and tucking it away to start talking to families about earlier next year, maybe even just after Halloween, since that's when it seems a lot of the holiday hubbub starts for people, is the stores already start having things, and, people start talking about Thanksgiving right after Halloween. I think also looking at what you need to be looking out for with families. Are there families that are kind of at risk right now that you need to be aware of? And what is it that lets you know this family is at risk? And when do you need to jump in and have a conversation with them? And then again, I think tips you can share with older adults about how they can enjoy the holiday more, either around the sensory changes or around making choices about how they spend their time and making sure that enough of their traditions are carried forward without being too many. But thinking about those older clients at this time can be a great idea. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn it back to Steve. And Steve can open the lineup for questions.
Great. Fantastic presentation, Dr. Amy. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
As you can see from the slide up on your screen, it is time for the Q&A portion of today's webinar. So please send us in those questions, and we will pose them to Dr. Amy. First question here for you, Dr. Amy. What is the best way I can go about speaking with my patients' families about what their senior loved ones need during the holidays? I want to prepare the families without offending them.
Well, I think the idea of having the conversation about, what would make the holidays the happiest for everyone is a great conversation you can have that isn't offensive. And I think saying to people that one of the things that you've observed as a professional over the years is that oftentimes in their attempt to make the holidays happy, that families overdo and that everybody ends up exhausted, that you just want to help them think through what matters most with them and to create a situation that's happy both for the older adult but for them as well. So I think all of that would be useful to have a conversation. And I think approaching from the standpoint of wanting everybody to have the most happiness with the least amount of stress, very few of us would object to those kind of conversations, I think, to have somebody looking out for us in that way. So I think it's unlikely that a family would be offended by that kind of question.
Okay, next question. I work with a lot of aging clients who have family members who do not recognize the gift of time, We were talking about the gift of time earlier. How can I communicate the importance of this to them?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and it might even be worth sharing if they'd be open to this. That Gallup Healthways survey that I mentioned to you, and the fact that survey found that what made people the happiest was that idea of spending time together, and that it was 6 to 7 hours a day, that kind of thing, was when people said they were the happiest. And I think the idea that reminding people that as people age, what we know is there's really much less interest or emphasis for most people on the material. And so we have to look at what else is available to us if we take that, take away the material. So I would say, again, have that conversation openly about not trying to stress out the family. And I think that's the other thing, because family could see this as another expectation. Oh, geez, now I'm supposed to spend more time. But to see it in a creative way. So who else could you involve besides the usual suspects, if you were? Are there grandchildren who could come over, who could spend a little bit of time doing something holiday-related that would really create a lot of fun and joy for everybody in the family? That's a possibility. Or thinking about neighbors that might enjoy spending time with the older adult. So it doesn't have to be just the family spending the time. So I think the balance here is talking about how important it is without putting additional expectation on people who may be really stressed out. So that's that would be my recommendation on that.
Okay, next question here. How do you help seniors who might not have had a lot of Christmas memories?
It's never, I always think it's never too late to create memories. So I think the idea of asking people what would make this year happy, I don't think we have to spend our time reminiscing about past holidays to be happy. So I would say, is there something that they've always wanted to do at the holidays? Is there something that is special to them that they either have done or may not have had the opportunity to do that they could do this year? And talk about, whatever time is left, we can experience happiness in this current year. It doesn't have to be going back to when we were 5 or 6. And, the other recognition is that not everybody has great childhood memories about holidays. For many families, they were stressful times, and there may be happy memories. There may be a lot of difficult memories. So I think it's not unlikely that you will have a lot of people who are your clients who may not have had the easiest holidays or the easiest memories. So it's about focusing more on the current and what they want for now.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about ways to be sensitive to grief and loss among family members over the holidays, and how traditions and or memories can come into play or be useful for healing?
I love that. That's a great question. And, grief and loss is a big part of the holiday season for a lot of people because, again, it triggers memories of times gone by. I know both of my parents are gone, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about them. But certainly at the holidays, it triggers a lot more for me, the loss of not having them here anymore. And my parents have been gone for a number of years now, and it was even more difficult in the very beginning. And I think that that's true for many people. And, of course, you think about spouses having lost spouses. That's a very difficult loss that's even greater. So I think sensitizing people that they don't have to dwell, the family doesn't have to dwell on all the losses, but people need a space to be able to talk about it too. And I think this idea that we're supposed to just be, jolly the whole Christmas season creates a lot of difficult expectation because most of us aren't jolly all the time anyway, and so why would we be jolly constantly at Christmas? So I would say being able to open up the space for people to talk about it, to be comfortable, to acknowledge that the holidays bring up difficult feelings, that brings up the grief and the loss, and it's normal to remember people who've gone at these special times, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to have a day where you feel really sad about it. And I think encouraging family to be able to talk to each other about the losses and let people have that space to feel sad even in the midst of what's supposed to be a very joyful season. I think that's the hard part is there's so much expectation on the joy of the season, which, we would all like to experience all the time, but I don't think that's realistic.
Okay, and speaking of joy, the next question here, as we prepare for the holidays, what can we do to address depression before it hits?
Well, I think that's, again, we know that depression is a huge issue in our country, depression and anxiety, and I think having an awareness of that, having an awareness that before it hits can be tough, but I think having an awareness if someone gets triggered cyclically, which sometimes happens for people, so, that they know that every holiday season they tend to become a bit depressed, what needs to happen about that will vary. If a person naturally kind of cycles back out of it, they may just need a support group or to see a counselor or just to talk to a family member or friend and to know that they have the space to feel sad. I think sometimes we confuse sadness and depression. Depression is debilitating and goes on in a way that impacts our quality of life and our ability to function. And if that, of course, happens, somebody needs treatment. Both they need to be assessed and to determine what the best course of treatment is. But if it's just sadness, they just need the space to be able to experience that emotion too. It's part of the fabric of the emotions. Heading it off, again, it's hard to do it unless you kind of know it's cyclical. If there are certain triggers for that person, to have an awareness of what those triggers are, and then to try to help that person manage through those and to seek appropriate help so that they're not left feeling alone and isolated as they're trying to cope with those feelings. And I think we should have a real watchful eye for depression during the holidays and right after the holidays, because certainly it can be a time of year that is very difficult for many, many folks.
Okay, I'm working with a client who is suffering from Alzheimer's. How can I explain to her family that sometimes the holidays are really just too much and they should try to slow down a bit?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, again, helping family understand that the brain has changed is one of the key parts of this. And to imagine what it's like to, and I've actually heard of people doing this exercise, to ask people who do not have dementia to imagine blaring loud music going on that they don't like, very loud blaring music, to imagine people trying to shout and talk to them at the same time, to imagine a lot of visual stimulation going on, and that sense of overstimulation that we've all experienced at various times is what certainly happens to people with dementia, and especially at the holidays when there may be lots of people in the house and lots of noise and lots of commotion that we see as joyful and as part of the holidays, but it can be overwhelming. And so if they can put themselves in that position, then they can talk about how do they reduce that for someone. Maybe they just need a space where that person can get away and go take a nap or go rest, or if it's, on a regular basis, giving them breaks. So the breaks are scheduled. You don't wait for the person to become overstimulated, but you actually, maybe every hour take a few minutes out, make sure that their routine is protected as much as possible. But if you can explain to family, this is because although they look the same, their brain is no longer able to handle all of this. Sometimes that family can get it from that standpoint.
All right. Well, Dr. Amy, we're just about out of time for today's web seminar, but I want to thank you for joining us today and for a very topical web seminar. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Take care. Happy holidays.